Hi, this is Chef Janie, and today we're going to be making my Indian Sweet Pickles. Hey, you caught me. Ready to make some homemade pickles? Come on, let's get started. About 3 cups of vinegar, 3 cups of sugar, and a couple of drops of green food coloring. You want to give this a stir, and you want to bring this up to a really hard simmer, a near boil, and you want to get this bubbling clear across here, and you want to maintain that boil for about 3.5 to 4 minutes. Okay? Now while that's coming up to a boil, we're going to take our vinegar and sugar and our green food coloring, and we're going to add our spices. Now here I've added 2 teaspoons of salt. Now remember, you don't want to use iodized salt because that leaves your liquid powdery from the iodine. You want to use just regular sea salt or kosher salt, or salt used for pickling. Here I have my jars in the water bath canner, and I am just getting them sterilized. I got the lids and the bands in there as well. Now to this you want to add about 1/2 teaspoon, 1/8 to 1/2 teaspoon of powdered mustard, or you can even use 1/2 teaspoon of mustard seed if you like. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I'm also making sweet pickles. And by the way, this is not only the recipe for my sweet pickles. As you can see, I've got plenty canned up here. It's also my recipe for sweet zucchini, onion, and banana pepper mix. And that's really good too on like pork or chicken dishes. And then here I've got dill pickles, and remember, that's made completely different. Right now we're making a sweet pickling mix. Okay? As you can see, I've made a lot of them so far. This is all just from one vine in my garden, isn't it, dear? We made quite a bit of pickles already this year, and you can see I have another vat. It's fall, and we are still canning up pickles. Okay? So this is the basic recipe that I'm showing you for this. Now, you're going to add your teaspoon of mustard to each pot. We're going to add about 6 dashes of nutmeg. And here we have celery salt. And I'm adding about 1/2 teaspoon of celery salt. Here we have cinnamon, and I'm just going to add about 5 or 6 dashes of it. And then here we have cardamom seed that has been ground, and I'm going to add just about 1/2 teaspoon to a teaspoon of it. Doesn't have to be measured. You don't want to go over the measurements I give you. Okay. Love the smell of cardamom seed. And then we're also going to add about a teaspoon of turmeric powder. Remove this from the heat. We don't want it boiling quite that hard. Okay. And then this is my secret Indian recipe for this, and it's garam masala. And I'm going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of garam masala to each batch here as well. Okay, now here we're just going to remove the jars. Nice, hot, and sterile. Okay, and we're going to pack them with either our pickles, our zucchini, onions, and banana mixture, or our hard-boiled eggs that have been peeled. Now if you're using pickles, you can add for a pint, you can use 1/8 of a teaspoon of pickling crisp, or you can use a quarter of a teaspoon, a rounded quarter of a teaspoon, if you're using quart jars. And this will help preserve your pickles and keep them nice and crisp while they're in canned storage. Now once you've sterilized your pans and your jars while they're hot, go ahead and pack them with your fruit. And remember, never use fruit that has bad spots on it. Now we're just doing pickles, so you can just cut some of the brown striping or whatever off of them. Try to get a variety of sizes. Don't put all the big ones in one jar and all the small ones in another jar. We want them to, the wrong one. Here I'm doing spears. And here I'm doing slices, just to kind of give you an idea of what you can do. Now, when I made my pickles, I just left this in boiling hot water that came up to room temperature for about 4 or 5 hours. Okay? And you want to pack these fairly tight. Okay, now here you can see we've packed our jars evenly. What I've done here with my pickling spears is I have packed them to about 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch from the top. Packed them fairly tight. Not too tight though, we want plenty of fluids in here for the canning process. And then here, I came up a little short. I probably cut too many spears and not enough slices. So what I did here is I came up with an even amount in each jar. I didn't want to fill one jar up higher than the others because these are going to process at the same time. So I evened that out. What we're going to do is take our pickling crisp granules, and we want to make sure, since these are pints, we want to make sure we got the 1/8 of a teaspoon, and we're just going to put in a rounded amount into each one. Okay? And you can get this, any of your basic grocery store will have this. Okay? Now you don't have to put this in. Most of the jars up there that I have, I didn't even have this, so I didn't even put it in. But this does help keep it crisp during storage, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to add our hot liquid. I gave my stuff a stir, made sure it was still simmering, brought it directly from the stove, and we're just going to fill this up about 1/2 to 1/4 inch from the top. Now these pans with the spouts on them, the pour spouts, make this a lot easier. You can also use a funnel if you like, but that makes it a lot harder since the funnel has a pointed end. Okay, there we go. Finish filling these up. We'll make sure they're even. Okay, I'm going to run a sharp object or a knife that's been sterilized. I'm using this because I got the jars out with it, so I know it's sterilized. You just want to run this down the sides and get any air bubbles out. Especially in these spears. I really packed them tight. Okay? And you want to do this to the jars about 5 or 6 times. See, there's an air bubble that just came up. There's another one. There you go. Just want to keep doing this until there's no more air bubbles. Okay? Okay, now once we've gotten the air bubbles out of them, and we've adjusted our amount, I had enough to make another jar here. These were packed a little too tight. You want, when you try to get the air bubbles out, you want them a little bit loose. You want stuff floating around a little bit, okay? So then what we're going to do is we're going to add just enough liquid to bring this about 1/4 to 1/2 inch from the top. Make sure everything's nice and even. Go. Okay, now what we're going to do is take a nice clean, somewhat soapy rag, and we're just going to clean the jars off really, really well, okay, because this is very sticky stuff that we just made. And get the rims cleaned off here really well. And then what I like to do is I like to get my hand a little wet here. What I like to do is just get my fingers a little wet here and run my fingers around the edge like this. This will help me tell if there's any cracks in the lids or anything like that. Just keep rinsing your hand off and run it over the lids like this. And that's after you've kind of washed off the jars. You don't want anything. And then even go over it again if you have to. But don't use any jars that's cracked or any lids that look like they're missing some of their some of that pinkish orange sealant. So examine everything really well. Okay? Now we're going to do this with all the jars. And then what we're going to do then is we've got our lids down in our canner bath boiling, and what we're going to do is we're going to remove those lids carefully without touching the pink sealing foam, and we're going to place this on the top of our lids. Now remember, I'm going to give this one more run with a wet finger before I put the lids on. And then we're going to tighten these these lids down with the screw bands, put it on until it gives you some resistance, okay? And then give it another partial turn, and then just barely turn it on. Once you get resistance, barely push that on. And then you don't want it on too tight, but you want it on tight enough that it's going to seal and it's going to keep it still, okay? And what happens when you pressurize these, even in a hot water bath, it'll pop those lids down, and we're going to teach you in a minute what that looks like and what that sounds like, okay? So let's go ahead and get our lids on here. Let's get these cleaned up and put our lids on, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, now I'm going to bring my water bath back up to a boil, and I'm putting in my canning rack. Okay, and once we have this back up to somewhat of a boil, we're going to process our jars. We're just going to carry our spears over here and sit those here, and we're just going to finish filling the pot up with the rest of the jars. You want to make sure the jars are covered 1 to 2 inches over the tops of the lids with water, hot water. And you don't want to put this into a cold water bath and then heat it up. You want to make sure the water is boiling as you set these in. Okay? Now canning starts when you put on the lid. I use a glass lid, so I can still see there's some bubbling going on in here. When you got a nice hard bubble, boil around this, you drop the temperature down a bit, about medium high, and you keep that nice boil going around all your jars. You want to start your timing then, and you'll want to time it for anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes, depending on what you're doing. For these pickles, I'm going to go 8.5 to 9 minutes. You can go 15, that's fine, but the longer you go, the more mushier your pickles might be. So, and I mean 5-10 minutes works. So I only add the extra minutes because of knowing when to actually start the time. So to be on the safe side, I always just add a few extra minutes. That's just me. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, so. Okay, we're still not boiling enough to count it yet. Get that temperature up. Okay. And that's fine because we got to get the jars back up, the liquid and the produce inside the jars. We got to get that up to a boiling temperature anyway, so that's going to take a few minutes. Okay, you can see our steam leaving the sides of the canner and out of our steam vent hole there. I don't know if you can see that or not. There it is. Okay, you can really see the water in here boiling around. I'm only going to open this just so I can show it to you. That's what we want. That means the fluids inside the jar and our contents inside the jars are hot enough to keep this boiling. Okay, so our time will start now. And I'm going to water bath can these pickles, these sweet pickles, for about 8.5 to 9 minutes. Okay, there we go. 8:40 sound like a good number. That'll work. I mean, this works at 5 minutes, but I like to make sure, like I said, that the fluids in the jars are as hot as the water. And I added the pickling crisp to it, so that's fine. And just look at your recipe. Usually the recipes will tell you how long to can them for. You can can up to 15 minutes in a hot water bath for these pickles, and they'll be fine. But they'll seal either way. As long as the jar's good and your seal on your lid is fine, they will seal.